The Overthinking Trap, why your brain isn't broken, it's just echoing. We have been told for decades that the human brain is a supercomputer, a logic machine designed to solve every problem through sheer processing power. But here is the uncomfortable truth that most psychologists won't tell you. Your problem isn't that you are thinking too much. It is that you aren't actually the one doing the thinking. Most of what you call overthinking is actually just a mental loop of borrowed anxieties, societal expectations, and evolutionary echoes that have nothing to do with who you truly are. You aren't stuck in a cycle of high intelligence, you are stuck in a cycle of inauthentic noise. Today, we are going to dismantle the myth of the overactive mind and map out the path toward authentic cognition, because once you stop thinking like everyone else, the paralyzing weight of your thoughts finally begins to lift. When you lay awake at 3 in the morning rehearsing a conversation or weighing the pros and cons of a career move for the 100th time, you believe you are engaging in deep analysis. In reality, you are likely experiencing a psychological phenomenon where the brain defaults to simulated survival. This isn't productive thought, it is a defensive mechanism. True thinking is an active, creative process that moves you from point A to point B. What most people call overthinking is actually mental rumination, a static state where the mind spins its wheels without ever gaining traction. The weight you feel isn't the weight of complex ideas, but the friction of trying to solve a problem using a blueprint that wasn't drawn by you. Authentic thinking requires a level of honesty that most of us avoid because it forces us to confront the fact that our current worries are often just performances for an invisible audience. Consider the case of a man named Elias, a brilliant architect who found himself paralyzed by every project. He spent months obsessing over the structural integrity of a single wall, convinced that his overthinking was a symptom of his high standards. He read every book on perfectionism and followed every productivity hack, but the dread only grew. One afternoon, while staring at a blank blueprint, Elias realized that his anxiety wasn't about the physics of the building at all. He was obsessing over the wall because he was terrified of his father's voice in his head, a man who had told him he would never be precise enough. Elias wasn't overthinking architecture, he was inauthentically processing a decades-old trauma. The moment he identified that the logic he was using belonged to someone else, the paralysis vanished. He began to think authentically, focusing on his own creative vision rather than defending himself against a ghost. Authentic thinking is characterized by a sense of movement and clarity, even when the subject matter is difficult. Inauthentic thinking, or what we mislabel as overthinking, feels like a performance. You are subconsciously trying to think your way into being liked, being safe, or being perceived as successful. This performance consumes massive amounts of cognitive energy because you are essentially trying to run a simulation of how the world will react to you. When you switch to authentic thinking, you stop asking, "What is the right thing to do?" and start asking, "What is the true thing to do?" This shift changes the neuro-narrative from one of fear-based prediction to one of value-based action. You must learn to distinguish between the chatter of your social conditioning and the signal of your actual intuition. To reclaim your mind, you have to audit the origins of your thoughts. Most of the logic we use to torture ourselves is actually borrowed from parents, peers, or the digital echo chambers we inhabit. If you find yourself stuck in a loop, ask yourself whose voice is actually speaking. Authentic thinking feels like an internal dialogue with your own values, whereas inauthentic overthinking feels like an interrogation by an outside force. You can practice this by physically writing down your repetitive thoughts and tracing them back to their source. If the thought starts with "I should" or "people might think," it is almost certainly inauthentic. By stripping away these borrowed scripts, you reduce the volume of the noise, allowing your actual intellect to solve problems with the surgical precision it was meant to have. From a neurological perspective, inauthentic thinking keeps the brain in a state of high beta wave activity, which is associated with stress, anxiety, and fight or flight responses. This state inhibits the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for complex decision-making and creative problem-solving. When you are overthinking, you are effectively locking the doors to the very parts of the brain you need to find a solution. Authentic thinking, however, encourages the brain to enter an alpha or theta state, where the subconscious can bridge gaps and find innovative paths forward. By choosing to think authentically, focusing on your own lived experience and personal truth, you actually lower your cortisol levels and allow your brain to function at its peak capacity. You aren't thinking too much, you're just using the wrong frequency. You know, every person has a unique cognitive signature, a specific way they process the world when they aren't trying to conform. Some people think in systems, others in metaphors, and others through physical sensation. Overthinking, well, that happens when you try to force your brain to think in a signature that isn't yours. For example, if you are a visual thinker but you're trying to overthink a problem using verbal logic because that's what your boss expects, you'll probably experience mental burnout. To think authentically, you really have to lean into your natural cognitive style. But honestly, this requires a level of self-trust that many of us have lost. You have to believe that your natural way of perceiving the world is, in fact, sufficient. And when you align your thinking process with your natural temperament, the effort of thinking just disappears, replaced by a sense of flow and discovery. You know, we often justify our overthinking by calling it preparation. We tell ourselves that if we think through every possible negative outcome, we can somehow prevent them from happening. But honestly, this is the ultimate form of inauthentic thought, because it's based on the delusion of control. Authentic thinking, on the other hand, accepts the inherent uncertainty of life and focuses on how you'll respond based on your character, rather than trying to outcalculate the future. So, instead of preparing for every scenario, just focus on grounding yourself in your own principles. If you know who you are and what you stand for, you really don't need to spend hours simulating every possible conversation. You can trust that your authentic self will know how to respond when the moment actually arrives, and well, this realization is the kill switch for chronic rumination. The next time you feel the weight of an overactive mind, just stop and perform a truth check. Ask yourself, if I didn't care what anyone thought of me, what would I do right now? The answer that comes up in that split second, that's your authentic thought. Everything that comes after that, the buts, the ifs, and the whatabouts, that's the inauthentic noise that leads to overthinking. Action is, without a doubt, the greatest antidote to the paralysis of the mind. Authentic thinkers understand that a good decision made now is better than a perfect decision made never. By taking a small, authentic action, you actually provide your brain with new data, which breaks the loop of simulation and brings you back to the real world. You move from being a victim of your thoughts to being the architect of your reality. The journey from overthinking to authentic thinking isn't about doing less, it's really about being more. It's a commitment to clearing out the mental clutter of other people's expectations and rediscovering the raw power of your own perspective. Your brain is not a prison of what-ifs, it's a tool for what is. When you stop performing and start processing, the world becomes a place of opportunity rather than a minefield of potential failures. This shift is honestly transformative, because it doesn't just change how you think, it changes who you are in the face of challenge. You become someone who's guided by an internal compass rather than a social weather vane. This brain map is your first step toward a psychological breakthrough that can, redefine your entire life. If you found value in this deep dive into the mechanics of the human mind, go ahead and subscribe to our channel for more psychologically backed strategies for growth. We're here to help you dismantle the barriers between who you are and who you're capable of becoming. Share this video with one person today who's struggling under the weight of their own mind. You might just give them the key to their own mental freedom. Remember, your mind is your greatest asset, but only if you are the one who owns it. Stop overthinking and start thinking like yourself.